Okay, I think we can start. So, hi. So I work in a company in Montreal, which is a software house, and we mostly do apps. So they can be browser apps, mobile apps, generally applications and not websites. We don't specialize in making websites. We are not a company for that. Sometimes the website is in the scope of the project, sometimes not. Sometimes the client delegates this task to a different company. But there are situations like this when the client doesn't want a website, but then we get this message that here we have a message from Michael, and he says that they have like some investors meeting next month, and they realize that they need a landing page ASAP, right? And it can be very simple site, only one page, static content. They have everything, designs, all the content, so probably some easy stuff, like maybe 1 week of work for a developer. So not a problem, we can do that. And we deliver the website, the client is very happy, but then a few days later, this message. So the site is looking great, but can you just change the order of the icons in the footer? Also easy stuff, we can do it in a few hours and deploy everything, and the site is live, everyone is happy. Then a few weeks later, Michael hired a new team member, Vanessa, and he wants to add her to our team section. So, okay, also not a difficult task. It may take just 2 hours and some deploy, so not a problem. Then a few days later, they realize that there are some mistakes in the content. So at that time we are pretty annoyed, but of course we can do it. And then they think that maybe it's a good thing to add a blog section to the site where their marketing can add some content. So at that moment I'm probably looking like this, so I'm pretty annoyed, and I already know that we should ask more questions to Michael at the beginning, and that Michael actually needs some tool to manage the content of the website. My name is Maciej Korolik, and I'm gonna talk about a possible solution to that problem, which is content management system, in short CMS. By the way, you can ask me questions probably in the comments on YouTube or Facebook, and I will be answering them at the end. And my presentation is in English, but if you want to ask a question in Polish, feel free, I will also answer that. So getting back to the presentation, when they think about CMS, probably one of the first things that comes into our minds is, of course, WordPress. But let's be serious, we are on the JavaScript conference, so we probably should hate WordPress by default. Of course, I'm kidding, WordPress is a good tool and big part of the internet uses WordPress for their sites, but I'm gonna talk about Headless CMS, and Headless CMS is a little bit different. So I know that this term is quite popular in recent years, and probably many of you know what Headless CMS is. Maybe some of you work in companies that specialize in websites and in Jamstack, and in this case you use Headless CMS a lot. But just to be on the same page with everyone, I want to quickly describe what it is and how it's different between Headless CMS and different CMSs. So when we think of traditional CMS, like for example WordPress that I mentioned, first you have the content that you put into the CMS, you have some UI of the editor where you manage the content, probably some database, maybe some file storage, and then you have this part with front-end templates and the web server that serves the website. The website can be responsive, it can be visible on desktop, on tablet, on mobile, but it's generally this one website that is generated, the front end is generated by the CMS. Well, in Headless CMS, first part is the same. We have a content first that we put into some editor, there is some database, file storage, everything, but then there is an API, not front-end templates, not web server, but just an API, and you can connect to this API from different custom frontends. So we can have one custom frontend for a website, different app for mobile, and let's say a smartwatch app. And all of them can be connected to the same API. So why it's called headless? If we think of traditional CMS, and if we imagine as it's human, it talks to the user with its head. So in this case, the head will be the front-end templates and the web server, so this thing that generates the ready website. While in Headless CMS, the head, so the thing that talks to the user, is like detached from it. So it's not the part of the CMS, and that's why it's called headless, because it doesn't have the head. By the way, WordPress, as I mentioned, is a traditional CMS, but it can act as Headless CMS also, because you can like activate API access to the WordPress CMS, and you can use it as it is a Headless CMS, but of course it's not its main purpose. It's not made for that. Okay, why would we even think about using Headless CMS? So as I said, the content and presentation layer are separated, which is good because as front-end developers we can use any technologies that we want, and we can avoid using our beloved PHP. We can build our website in Next.js, Next, or Svelte, or any modern framework that you like, so that developer experience is definitely better. Also, content can be distributed across multiple channels, because as I show on the diagram, you can use the same CMS to power mobile app, web app, and some smart TV, anything. So you can have one tool to manage content across different devices, different channels. Also, better performance, or maybe should I say better control over the performance, because since we as front-end developers can do the front-end in whatever technology we want, and it's not directly connected to the CMS, we can have better control on how we tweak the performance, and the CMS itself doesn't affect the performance as it is in, for example, WordPress, where the performance is the effect of this whole big machine, right? So usually it's not obvious that with Headless CMS we will have a better and faster website, but it's possible to definitely build better performant website with Headless CMS. Also, enhanced security, and it's also connected with the separation of content and presentation, because it's not just one tool, and the database and content of ours and of our users is totally separated from the front end, so probably also more secure. And the last thing, also easier deployments. We as front-end developers can just do any hotfix, any UI changes, and deploy it without thinking about the backend, about data migration, database, etc. So the process is much easier and faster. Okay, who can benefit from that and who can use it? We already met Michael. So as we did some better research and asked more questions, we realized that Michael actually doesn't want a simple website. He wants a full landing page that can be fully customized, probably by his content marketing team. So this is maybe like a basic scenario where we use CMS at all. But also, let's meet Jennifer. So Jennifer already has an app, and she has a browser app, an iOS app, and Android app, and it's working, but she needs a tool to control just some part of the content there. So imagine you have an app that's working, that's functional, but her marketing team wants to, let's say, add some announcements or some new promotions, and they want one tool to add the same thing to every 3 of the apps. And this is also a very good case for Headless CMS. And also let's meet Susan. So Susan has a totally different case. She wants to build MVP of a mobile app. It's a very simple app, so she needs a simple backend to handle just basic crowd operations. So imagine it's, for example, an app for sharing food recipes, right? So you only need some users and ability for them to add the recipes to the database, maybe an admin that can manage them, and other users read that. So very basic stuff, and it's also a case where Headless CMS will be useful, because she could use it as the beginning, like ready tool, and she can save a lot of money and resources because she doesn't need to build full backend for her. So it's also a good case for Headless CMS. Okay, so now we know why we want to use it and who can use it. So how to choose the best tool for our client. Also a disclaimer here, I won't tell you what CMS is the best, unfortunately. But we can try to look at this and we can try to choose the best. So first we can start with the thing that we as developers probably are the best of, so using Google, right? So what I can do, I can put best headless CMS in Google and check the results. So okay, I click the first list and I have a lot of headless CMSs, then another one and another one and another one, and I realized that probably there are like tens or even 100 of headless CMSs available on the market, right? So it's pretty overwhelming. Okay, but maybe one of my friends told me that okay, let's start with Storyblock. Storyblock is good. So I can look for Storyblock CMS, and unfortunately probably first few of the Google results will be like Storyblock alternative, and they are recommending Prepper or Magnolia as also #1 Storyblock alternative. So we can see that Google actually doesn't solve our problem, and we still don't know which CMS is the best for our project and for our client. So we need a way to analyze which CMS is the best. And while analyzing it, we should think of 3 things, I think. So first will be project and business needs. This is probably obvious because we are actually building a business for the client, right? And also user experience. And by user experience here, I don't mean the experience of the end users, so the people that will read the site or the app, but users as content editors. So let's say Michael has a content marketing team and they will be using the CMS. So they will spend a lot of hours using the CMS, so also their experience is very important in choosing one. And last but not least, developer experience. Also, we as developers will be working with that tool a lot, so it's also good to choose the one that is nice to work with. So let's break this 3 main things into smaller factors. I want to start with the question self-hosted or cloud-based. So with self-hosted CMSs, it's probably usually something like you have an open source tool that you can download and install on your VPS or on some serverless environment. So you need to maintain the infrastructure and updates because there is no one that takes care of it. You need to install it and you need to handle everything on, let's say, AWS or Google Cloud. You have to be sure that everything is up to date, etc. So it also needs bigger investment at the beginning because you need to set up this environment, you need to install it, so probably some backend developer will be needed or some DevOps engineer. But you have control over the cost because you are paying for the AWS and you can predict what traffic will make what cost, and you have control over it. And also you have full control over the data because you have the database is yours. So in case of some very sensitive GDPR projects, it may be quite important that you are in control of the database and not some external service. And also self-hosted CMS usually allows us to customize it a little bit, because if it's a open source tool, we can just jump into the code and change the things that we want to change for our project. While cloud-based CMS, infrastructure and updates are delegated to external service, because cloud-based CMS is usually like a subscription tool, so you pay monthly fee and you can use the tool. So you don't care about where is the database, if the app is up to date, if everything is working, there is a company that does this for you. And also it means very easy setup. You don't have to install anything, and usually setting up a cloud-based CMS can be done by a person that is only a little bit technical, and they can just set up basic data models, etc. But the cost depends on the pricing plans of the tool. So there is usually some free plan in cloud-based CMSs, but you don't have control over it. If you need some tools that are only available in the higher plan, you have to pay even though you don't use the other features of that plan. Also, there is a risk that the prices may change, because you can start using some cloud-based CMS that is new and you pay like $10 per month, and it's going great, but let's say this CMS gets more popular, and the prices might increase and there is nothing you can do about it. And usually there is very limited customization, because you can't just edit the code of the CMS editor. So it has to be taken into consideration too. So generally it's a very hard decision, and you can analyze your project in details and ask your client and probably calculate the cost. It may seem that self-hosted CMS is cheaper because it's an open source tool, but you have to remember that it adds a lot of cost that is in the developer work and DevOps work. So yeah, it always needs to be calculated. But if we think about our clients, and if we see Susan, she wants to build an MVP for a mobile app and she needs a simple backend to that, maybe self-hosted will be good for her, because she can use the built-in functionalities and it may be enough for MVP, so basic CRUD operations. But in the future, if she wants to grow, possibly she can extend the functionalities to match her needs. Of course, it's not a final solution probably, and if the app scales too much, she will have to build a custom backend probably. But for MVP, it can be enough. So example here will be Strapi or Keystone.js. Okay, let's go to another factor that may impact your decision, which is pricing. So with self-hosted CMS, the thing is easy here, because you can use open source tool, so initial cost is free, and then the total cost equals the cost of infrastructure, and of course the cost of developer work, which can be higher, but let's not talk about that. In cloud-based CMS, there are different pricing plans, but very often there is a free plan with some limitations that you can probably use in some cases. So when we see the example of pricing table, here is the example of Storyblock. You can see in the second column the free plan. It's free, and if you want more users, so let's say you have a team of marketing that has 2 members, you can pay additional $9 for additional seat, which is not a big money. The next plan, which probably has bigger limits, is $100 per month, and it includes 5 users. Also not a big cost. Similar it is with Prismic. So here is example pricing table from Prismic. Also there is a free plan, which is actually very generous. It offers unlimited API calls. And if you want more users, you can use starter plan, which is $7, and it includes 3 users. But when we see at, for example, Contentful, again there is a free plan, but the next one starts at $500 almost. So it's quite a big difference, and there is a risk that if you exceed the free plan and if you actually need features from the next plan, the cost will be much higher. So you should analyze the pricing at the beginning and talk with the client how they want to scale, and predict if the free plan will be enough or if the cheapest plan will be enough, because $500 per month, it can be an impact for a client if it's just for a landing page, right? And also remember that if you intend to use a free plan, check the license. because sometimes you can use it however you want, and sometimes the free plans are like, let's say, only for developers, for testing and for getting familiar with the tool, and if you want to do it commercially, you have to purchase the paid plan. I talked about limits because these different pricing plans have some limits. So if we look at the example here from Storyblock, there is a table, and for example with a free plan you have 1 million API requests, like 100 content types, 100 components. So these numbers may look big. For example, this 1 million API requests per month may look big, but imagine that you have a site with let's say 10 subpages, and on every page the API of the CMS is called like 5 times. And you have, let's say, few thousand users per month. These numbers doesn't seem that big. But should we even worry about that? Well, technology here comes in handy and it can help us. So let's analyze how we can build our website. Let's get into technology more. So we can do full server-side rendering, and in this case the CMS API will be called on every page view. So every time user comes into the website, it calls the CMS API and takes some calls from the limit. But we can also make our website fully static using static site generation, for example using Gatsby. And in this case, CMS API will be called only on initial page build. And if you want to update the site using current data from the CMS, we have to trigger the build again. But if you do the updates, like let's say every week, the API will be called only once per week, so you are far from exceeding this 1 million API calls. But you can do another thing, which is, let's say, a hybrid. It's called incremental static regeneration, and in this case CMS API is called first during initial build of the page, and then when pages are revalidated periodically. So let's get into technical stuff here, and let's see how incremental static regeneration works in Next.js. So imagine you have a page called blog, and it's on the top, you have function blog. It doesn't matter how the page looks like, but what is important for us is this getStaticProps function. Because in Next.js, when working with Headless CMS, usually we fetch the data in this getStaticProps function. So you can see here that we await fetch, and here could be some URL for CMS API, and we return this data that we get from the CMS as props to our main function. An important thing here is this revalidate parameter. So how the getStaticProps works? It's first called on build time on server side. So when we build a page, getStaticProps is called, so it needs to call the CMS API and return the content. But if we enable the revalidation, so adding the parameter revalidate, Next.js will attempt to regenerate the page whenever the request comes in, but at most every 10 seconds. So we can decide for every specific page what number of seconds we want. So let's say for home page we need to update it very often, so we can set 10 seconds, let's say. But if we have like a page called, for example, About Us, it doesn't change a lot. We can even set few hours for revalidation, and this way we can manage first which page is the most up to date, and also limit the number of API calls to the CMS. In new versions of Next.js there is even more, because you can use things like on-demand revalidation. And to use it, first you need to create an API route. You can call it revalidate, and in that case you don't have to use the revalidate parameter in getStaticProps. So page will be generated at the build time and will stay there. And then we can like revalidate it on demand. So calling this function, calling API slash revalidate, and here is a secret token, will trigger the page build. So when we look at the code, first it checks the secret token, because we want to be secure that no one triggers our revalidation that we don't want to do it. And then it runs this revalidate function on the path that we specify, and it triggers the rebuild of that page that is on this path. So this is very useful because we can have whole our page, we can have it fully static, and we can just trigger revalidation, so rebuild of specific pages only when we want to. And many CMSs offer webhooks functionality, so we can add this address that you create with this API route. You can add this into the CMS, and sometimes there is just a simple button that you click and you can trigger the rebuild of a specific page. So it can be very useful. Okay, let's go back to our factors that will make us decide on the CMS. So let's go to available field types. So when we look at the page, at the design of the page or a wireframe, you can see that it's made from, let's say, components. And here we have image, there is some heading, rich text, probably some video, some component that is repeated, maybe a link. And when we look at the CMS, we have available field types that you can build our content from them. Here is an example from Storyblock, and you can see that we have available text, text area, rich text, some assets, options. So what you should do when you decide on the CMS, you should analyze your site, analyze the design of your site, and ask the client what content they want to add to the website, and just compare it with available field types in the CMS of your choice. Because many of the CMSs offer almost the same list of available field types. So like here in the Storyblock, probably text, text area, rich text, image will be in everyone. But there are some specific cases, and I have example from the project that I worked on. So the client was doing a website, and they insisted to use Prismic CMS because they used it for some other website. They were familiar with this tool. So okay, we agreed, let's use Prismic CMS. It's also quite good CMS, but we didn't ask precisely what content they want to have there finally. And it turned out that the topic of the website was some economic analysis, and almost every day they were uploading some reports about economics from different parts of the world. So in almost every page there was a table with data, some big tables, and we realized that in Prismic CMS there was no table field type available. So we had to do some workarounds, like doing screenshots of this table and uploading them as images, or some uploading CSV as text and then converting into tables. So it was quite difficult, and probably we could avoid it by analyzing the content first and checking the available field types in the CMS. So how the field types work? So we have the fields that can be like text, image, rich text, boolean, link, different fields as I shown you. And from the fields you construct the models. So the models can be homepage, blog post, news item, and in the CMS it can work like this. So here is an example from Data CMS, and this is the part where you create the content model. Here is the model of product, and it's made from 6 different field types. So you have main image, product name, rating, etc. And then when it's done and the users, so the content editors, go to add new product or edit it, they see something like this. So on the right they see a form And you can see here the field types that are defined in the model. So field for image, for product name, rating, category, and so on and so on. And while we are here, we can think of another factor that will make us decide on the CMS. So the content editor and its user experience and its UI, how it looks, how it feels. Because we can have like very simple ones, like this is a Netlify CMS editor. It's very simple, it doesn't look so good, but maybe okay for some cases. Let's think of our clients, and we had Jennifer that wanted to just control small parts of her app. So maybe if it's just a small part of her business, of her work, maybe a simple editor will be enough for her. But for some clients it needs to feel good and needs to be usable. Another example here is Strappy. It looks a little better. So here you have like a list of articles, and here is how it looks when you edit something. It looks a little bit better. But again, what we can see here is only a form, as here in the Strappy, before I showed you the Netlify or Data CMS. So it's only a form, and we don't see actually if, for example, this image matches the other layout of the website, or if the title is not too long, because we don't see it in our site UI, we see it only in the view of the form in the CMS. So the client may ask, how can I see how it looks before publishing? Because he wants to make sure that the image matches the UI and the title is okay. Right. And of course here it's hard to predict. So again, the technology here comes in handy, because in Next.js we have this thing called preview mode. And how it works? Again, you define API route. In Pages API, it can be called preview. And in this API route, first you can check the secret token, but then this function inside the API route checks first if the content exists in the CMS. So we have this get post by Slack. It can be some helper, different CMSs, with different CMSs it may work differently. And then if the content exists, it first sets the preview data, so it actually sets some Next.js specific cookies in the user's browser, and then redirects back to the path that we intended to go. So if you go to the address /API/preview, you add the secret token and the path that you want to go, it will first check if this content exists, set these cookies, and redirects back to the page. But when the page opens in getStaticProps, you can get the preview parameter from the context, and based on that preview parameter you can decide if you want to show, let's say, draft version or published version. And you can use that in your API call to the CMS, so that when the getStaticProp runs and it sees that, okay, it's a preview, because then we want to show draft version. And also a good thing that, as you can see here, we don't have revalidate parameters, so in theory that page should be static every time. But if the preview cookies are there, it just bypasses the whole static content that is in the cache, and server-side renders the page every time. And also, since we access it from this very specific address that sets these cookies, other users see only the published version, but the editors can just preview how the website looks with the updated content. And many CMSs offer a functionality to just add this, how the preview URL works. And there is something like a button to just see the preview, opens it in a different tab, and you can see how it looks while you are editing. But it's nice, but the client may send us this message. So Michael says that he used WordPress once and he was able to design the website himself. Of course, first, it's never a good thing to let client design the website, but I think we know what he meant. So Michael probably used WordPress with this thing called Gutenberg editor or some other visual editor, and he was able to drag and drop or edit parts of the website as he was designing it. And with Headless CMS, as we saw previously, there is only this form which doesn't look as the ready website. But we have few ways to offer Michael that functionality. So we can use component-based editing, and it's available in few CMSs, and how it works is that you divide your website into the components. So here you can have some hero image, some text, some repeated components, video, etc. And then the client, the user of the CMS, not only sees the form where they can put the content, but they can use these defined components and place them in correct order, remove some, change some, etc. So example here will be slices in Prismic CMS, but as far as I remember, similar functionality is now also in Strapi and probably other CMSs too. We can go even level up, and we can do full live preview. And while this may seem more like a traditional CMS thing, we can do it with Headless CMS too. So here is an example from Storyblock, where I can open the page and I see the exact preview of the page rendered inside our Storyblock editor, and I can change the content, change parts of the content, and see how it changes live on this preview. It's actually a very cool feature. It works great, and here it's almost like using the visual editor in, for example, WordPress. So we can offer client the feeling of designing the page. We can only define the building blocks and the components for them, and they can just arrange them however they want. So of course this needs some more developer work. It's not only just fetching data from the API and putting it into different places of the website. So it's a little more time consuming to set it up, and it's a little bit more complicated, but definitely possible, and still you can use whatever front-end tool you want. Storyblock works with Next.js, with Nuxt, and other tools too, probably. So again, you can use your favorite framework and have this full live preview. Another factor that I want to talk about is internationalization. So usually at the beginning the client says something like this: we only need one version of the site, it's English, we don't need other languages. But after asking more questions, we can see that although they are planning to expand to Germany and France, so probably Michael will come back to us and ask for new languages in the future. So we should be prepared for that, and first what we should do is to check if the CMS of our choice offers more language versions. Usually they have that, and usually even if in the free plans there are at least two language versions to set up. But here we will have three, so probably you should also take it into consideration when analyzing the price. Anyway, as we are talking about Next.js, internationalization Next.js is very easy, and it's actually good to set it up even if the client doesn't need the languages for now. So what do you do it in Next.js? It's just a few lines in the config. You put the i18n in the next config. You define the list of locales and the default one, and what it does, it generates URLs for every language that you have defined. Also, if you want to have different domains, of course you have to set up these domains, but if you put them into next config, it will know that, okay, if I'm open from the example.fr domain, I should choose the fr locale. And then how to access this information in the page? So let's get back again to our getStaticProps function, where we fetch the content from CMS. The same as with preview mode, we can access the local information from the context, and we can use it to inside our API call to fetch proper version from the CMS. So it's actually only a few additional lines added to the config and to getStaticProps, but we are good to go. And now if the client wants to add more languages, they can just add them in the CMS. We only have to adjust the list in the config, but every page will just work because it will detect which locale it is now, and it will fetch the proper version from the CMS. So it's good to set it up at the beginning because it's very easy and it will save you a lot of time later. Okay, but what about developers? Because for now I was talking about the client needs, the business needs, and their experience of using the CMS. And of course, our work is also important, and how we work with the CMS. So what I would suggest that if from this analysis you feel that there are more than one CMS is available for you, then it's a good time to analyze if the CMS is what CMS is best for the developers. So you should think of the quality of documentation, and from my experience, very often the documentation of headless CMSs is not very nice, because there are usually quite new tools, and the creators of the CMS very often put the documentation as a last thing to do, and it's quite hard to work with. So also good to choose the headless CMS that is more mature, and you will be more confident that the documentation is better. Also, it's worth to check what the service provides in case of, let's say, some NPM libraries to help you work with the API, to help you work with the rich text, to analyze it. So there are a few things that will can make your life as developers easier, and it's definitely good to check that after you analyze everything, thinking about the client. Okay, so what now? Because I showed you what Headless CMS is, why you can use it, who can use it, and I tried to share with you a few factors that may impact your decision on which CMS to choose. But then again, you look at this list, and it's still a list of 100 CMSs to choose from, and the problem is that there is no one best CMS. Every CMS claims that their one is the best. So what to do now? It's still confusing, it's maybe even more overwhelming than before. So what you could do is you could always use the same CMS that you used in previous project, and probably in some cases it will be okay. Also, you can analyze every 100 of the CMSs using these factors that I shared with you, and you will spend a lot of time on that, and probably it's not worth it, because actually big part of this 100 CMSs is very similar. They offer almost the same, the differences are very small. So I would suggest to be somewhere here. So if you know some tools and you use them in previous project and they match your client, and you checked that every part is okay for the client or for the project, just use it. Don't think about the other hundreds that are available. Although when you feel that tools that you know are not good for the project, also I won't recommend analyzing every other ones, but just pick few, maybe pick something that your colleague used, or that you saw some interesting video on YouTube. Just pick few, analyze them, and think of the business needs, the user experience, and developer experience, and probably you'll be fine. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them now. Okay, which Headless CMS solution works best for you most of the time, and which one you are a big fan of? So I used few of them, and probably I didn't use anyone more than one time, because every time the project needs were different. I used Trappy, I used Prismic, Dato, Storyblock, Keystone. Probably my favorite was Storyblock, because it's just so amazing to see the live preview of the site, and it works really great. The technology is so cool beneath that. Actually, I would recommend you to check out how Storyblock works, and because it's very tricky thing and very nice solution there. But yeah, so I'm a fan of Storyblock, and from this area of more simple ones, I remember that using Data CMS was very nice, because it was just super easy to set up, and also super easy to for the client, for the content team to start using it. But it's definitely for a more simple project, and for the advanced ones, Storyblock is great, because it just looks cool and it's a great experience for the client. And also Storyblock is nice when you have a client, like I showed you our example of Michael, who says that they used WordPress and they use different CMSs with visual editor. Because in these cases it may be hard to convince the client that actually Headless CMS will be better for them, because they want to see the website, they want to edit it, and they want the same experience. And with Storyblock you can offer them the same experience, but still use your favorite JavaScript framework and still use it as a Headless CMS. So yeah, that's it. I hope it answers your question. Yeah, any metrics? Yeah, so I will read the question. Any metrics about better performance? How much faster compared to other solutions? Yeah, I didn't do any specific metrics, and actually it's hard to compare because the whole website will be totally different when using Headless CMS and traditional CMS. But as I said, with this better performance, maybe we should call it better control over the performance, because you can only tweak the front-end stuff, which is probably easier than analyzing if, let's say, some WordPress plugin adds something and it makes our performance wrong, or there is some, I don't know, database query that is slowing it down. With Headless CMS you can analyze only the front end, and when using the tools like Next.js, which has performance which works, which is created to give you possibilities to obtain a good performance, then probably you can have like scores over 95, things like that, and the CMS part doesn't affect the performance here. What do you think about using WordPress as a Headless CMS? So yeah, I mentioned that it's possible to use WordPress as a Headless CMS. I tried it once. I didn't make a full project with it. I was just doing some research when the client wanted a site built in WordPress, and I just didn't want to play with PHP and stuff. So I wouldn't recommend it as WordPress as a solution for a Headless CMS. Because it's just not made for it, and the experience for developers will be much better when you use something that is specifically made as Headless CMS. But if you have a site built in WordPress and you want to get part of the content or full content and show it, for example, also on a mobile app, or do like a separate page that takes some content from it, then it's a good idea, because you already have this backend built and you can just fetch some of the content from the API. But I wouldn't recommend it as an initial solution if you want to build a website to use WordPress and use it only as headless. The experience, both for you as a developer and both for the editor, won't be as good as using something truly headless. Yeah, I heard about Sanity. It's not like I didn't choose to work with it. As I shown you on the one of my last slides, the number of the CMSs is quite overwhelming, and you just usually don't have time to test everything. But Sanity is quite interesting because if I'm not mistaken now, because the number of the CMSs is too big that. But I think the Sanity CMS is interesting because I showed you the comparison between self-hosted and cloud-based CMSs, and with Sanity, it's something like a hybrid, because the database and the data API is in the cloud, but the UI of the editor is an open source tool it's a React app that you can install yourself, and you can customize it. So it's like a hybrid thing. The data and the API is still in the cloud, but you have control over the UI. So it's like three parts. You have your front end, you have the API, and also the open source front end from the Sanity. So also probably nice thing. And I heard many good things about Sanity CMS. I remember listening to Syntax podcast, and they recommended a lot. But for now, I just didn't have a chance to fully work with it and to use it in the real project. Do you think Headless CMS is a silver bullet for landing pages and blogs, or there are some cases when classic backend still can be used? Still the classic backend still like the. I don't know if you mean here the classic backend if you are talking about like traditional CMS and ready to like Headless CMS like WordPress. Of course, it still can be used, and as I said, WordPress is good and it powers like big part of the internet, and it's probably not going anywhere for like years now. So probably there are many cases where it can be used, and if you know WordPress and you can write a site in WordPress quickly, then just go for it, because it's like the effect for a client will be okay, and if you can make it performant and if you can make it secure and usable for the client, that's great. Use the tools that you want. I think what Headless CMS world is that it opens it for new things, we can do our websites in the technologies that were before used mostly for apps. And now I can just use my favorite Next.js and add the client possibility to edit the site. So it's great. But yeah, I think for at least some years, the both worlds will be there, and there is still a big need for traditional CMSs, for WordPress, etc. Okay, no more questions. So thank you very much. And if you want to meet me, I will be also at the Montreal virtual stand from 12:15 to 1 p.m. So you can come say hi. And remember that recordings from this presentation will be available on YouTube and on Facebook. Thank you very much.